We all agreed it was just a game at first, something to break the boredom of that long summer trapped inside the old house, 5 of us sharing the same roof, the same silence, the same unspoken fears about who we were becoming. The power went out that night, candles flickering on the dining table, shadows crawling up the walls, and someone laughed and said, "What if we all dressed differently tomorrow, just to feel new again?" Nobody said the word cross-dress, but we all knew what it meant. It felt harmless, almost funny, like trying on someone else's shoes for a minute and then stepping back into your own life. I remember nodding, pretending my heart wasn't suddenly racing, pretending this idea didn't hit something deep inside me that had been sleeping for years. The next morning the house felt strangely alive. Doors closed, drawers opened, fabric whispered. When we finally came together in the living room, there was laughter, teasing, cameras out, jokes flying. Everyone looked unfamiliar, playful versions of themselves, like actors in a rehearsal that would never be seen by the world. I laughed too, but my hands were shaking as I adjusted the clothes I was wearing. Something about the way the fabric rested on my body felt less like a costume and more like a memory returning. I told myself not to think too much. Everyone would change back by evening. This was temporary. That's what I kept repeating. But the day didn't end the way I expected. As hours passed, the jokes faded. We cooked together, sat together, talked more honestly than we ever had before. No one rushed to change. When I caught my reflection in the dark window that night, I froze. I didn't see embarrassment. I didn't see a mistake. I saw calm. And that scared me more than anything. I went to bed fully dressed, telling myself I was just tired, that tomorrow everything would be normal again. The next day, everyone changed back. One by one, doors closed, familiar voices returned, old clothes came back like armor. They came out smiling, relieved, already turning the experience into a story they could laugh about later. I waited. I stood in my room, staring at the clothes folded on my bed, the ones I was supposed to put back on, the ones that had always felt like a role I was playing for someone else. My chest felt tight. My legs wouldn't move. For the first time in my life, the thought of changing back felt like losing something real. I told myself I just needed more time. 5 minutes. 10. An hour passed. Someone knocked on my door, asked if I was okay. I said yes. My voice sounded different to my own ears, steadier than I expected. When I finally opened the door, still dressed the same, the hallway went quiet. Their smiles froze, confusion replacing the humor from yesterday. I tried to laugh it off, tried to say I'd change later, but the words felt weak. Inside me, something had already decided. That night I barely slept. Memories I had buried for years kept surfacing, moments when I had wished, moments when I had imagined, moments I had told myself didn't matter. I realized this wasn't about clothes at all. It was about permission. Everyone else had taken it for a day and given it back. I had taken it and discovered I couldn't return it without breaking myself. By morning, fear settled in. Not fear of being dressed this way, but fear of what it meant that I didn't want to stop. The house felt different now, heavier, like it was waiting for me to explain something I barely understood myself. As I sat there, listening to footsteps in the hallway, I knew one thing for sure. We had all cross-dressed, but whatever had changed inside me wasn't playing along anymore, and I didn't know if I was brave enough to face what came next. Breakfast that morning felt like walking onto a stage without a script. Everyone tried to act normal, talking about random things, clinking cups, pretending the tension wasn't thick enough to taste. I sat there quietly, aware of every movement I made, every glance that flickered in my direction and then away again. No one told me to change. No one told me to stop. And somehow that silence was louder than any argument could have been. I kept waiting for someone to laugh and say okay, joke's over, but it never came. Instead, there was this careful politeness, like they were afraid of saying the wrong thing and shattering something fragile. Later that day, one of them finally asked me why I hadn't changed back. It wasn't angry. It wasn't mocking. It was almost gentle, and that made my throat tighten. I opened my mouth to answer and realized I didn't have a clean explanation. I couldn't say because I want to or because it feels right. Those words sounded too big, too dangerous. So I said I wasn't ready yet. Even as I said it, I knew it was the truth, just not the whole one. The hours stretched on. People went about their routines, but everything felt off balance. I noticed how I moved differently now, how I spoke differently, not on purpose, not as an act, but because I wasn't bracing myself anymore. Every time I thought about changing back, my chest felt heavy, like I was about to step into a cold room after finding warmth. I realized how exhausted I had been before, how much effort it took to keep parts of myself hidden, even from me. That evening, one of them sat beside me and admitted something quietly. They said that for a moment, yesterday, they had felt free too, but it scared them, so they stepped back. They told me they admired my courage, even if they didn't fully understand it. That word courage echoed in my head long after they left. I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified. But I also felt honest, and maybe those two things were closer than I had ever realized. As days passed, the house settled into a new rhythm. No one forced me to change, but no one stopped watching either. I could feel the unasked questions hanging in the air. What does this mean? How long will this last? Who are you now? I asked myself those same questions every night. Sometimes doubt crept in, whispering that I was ruining everything, that I would regret this. Other times, when I caught my reflection, I felt a quiet certainty that scared me even more than the doubt. One night, alone in my room, I finally said it out loud, even though no one was there to hear it. I said I don't think I can go back. The words didn't explode. The world didn't end. Instead, I felt tears run down my face, not from sadness, but from relief. Admitting it, even in a whisper, felt like setting something free. The next morning, I walked into the living room knowing that sooner or later, I would have to explain myself fully, not with excuses or delays, but with truth. I didn't know if they would accept it. I didn't know if I would lose people I loved. All I knew was that pretending this was temporary had become a lie I couldn't carry anymore. We had all cross-dressed together, but somewhere along the way, I had crossed a line inside myself, and there was no clear path back, only the uncertain road ahead. The conversation I had been avoiding finally arrived without warning. We were all sitting together in the living room, the same room where this whole thing had started, and the familiarity of it made my chest ache. Someone said we needed to talk, and my heart dropped because I knew this wasn't about chores or schedules. It was about me. About the choice I was making just by continuing to exist the way I was now. I remember staring at the floor, tracing patterns with my eyes, feeling like every second of silence was stretching tighter around my lungs. They asked me if this was just a phase, just an extension of that first day. I looked up then, because for the first time I knew the answer clearly. I told them no. I told them I didn't know exactly what this meant yet, but I knew it wasn't something I could switch off. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. Words poured out that I hadn't planned, about how long I had felt disconnected from myself, how this wasn't about attention or rebellion, how it felt like finally standing in my own skin instead of borrowing someone else's. There were reactions I expected and some I didn't. Confusion, worry, a little fear. But there was also something softer. Someone admitted they had noticed how different I seemed, calmer, more present. Another said they were scared for me, not of me, and that distinction mattered more than I could explain. I realized then that this wasn't just my story anymore. My honesty was forcing everyone else to look at their own limits, their own ideas of normal, and that made them uncomfortable. That night I lay awake thinking about the world outside the house. Inside these walls, things were tense but contained. Outside, there were strangers, expectations, rules I had followed my entire life. The idea of stepping into that world like this filled me with dread. I imagined the looks, the questions, the rejection. I wondered if I was strong enough to carry this truth beyond the safety of people who at least knew me. For the first time since I hadn't changed back, I considered whether fear alone might push me into retreat. The next day proved I couldn't hide forever. We had to go out together for something simple, something ordinary, and suddenly nothing felt ordinary anymore. As we walked, I was hyper-aware of everything, of how I moved, of how visible I felt. Every passing glance felt like a spotlight. My hands trembled, but I kept walking. No one laughed. No one pointed. Most people didn't even notice. That realization hit me harder than any insult could have. I had built this fear into something monstrous, and yet the world just kept moving. When we got back, something shifted inside me. It wasn't confidence exactly, but it was resolve. I understood then that changing back wouldn't protect me from fear, it would only postpone it. Staying as I was meant facing uncertainty, but it also meant honoring the first honest decision I had made in years. I started to see this not as losing my old self, but as finally meeting the one I had ignored for too long. That evening, as I sat alone, I realized I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. Not from them, not from society, not even from my past self. The transformation wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and irreversible in the way truth often is. We had all cross-dressed together, but while they returned to who they were before, I was stepping forward into someone I was still learning to name, someone who felt real in a way nothing else ever had. Acceptance didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments, in small moments that didn't look important from the outside but changed everything inside me. Someone using a different tone with me without thinking. Someone asking my opinion about things they never had before. Someone defending me in a conversation I wasn't even part of. Each moment felt like a quiet brick laid under my feet, something solid forming where there had only been air. At the same time, doubt kept circling, reminding me that comfort inside a house didn't guarantee safety beyond it. I started spending more time alone, not because I felt rejected, but because I needed space to understand myself without an audience. I thought a lot about the version of me who existed before all this, the one who followed rules perfectly, who smiled on cue, who never caused confusion. I didn't hate that person. In fact, I felt compassion for them. They had done their best with what they knew. But I also realized they had been surviving, not living, and that realization carried a quiet grief with it. One evening, someone asked if I missed who I used to be. The question was honest, not judgmental, and I took a long time to answer. I said I missed the simplicity, the way things had been predictable. I didn't miss the emptiness. Saying that out loud felt like crossing another invisible line. I could feel the weight of the future pressing closer now, the understanding that this wasn't just a phase inside a house, it was a direction. Then came the first real test. A visitor. Someone who didn't know the story, who hadn't been there at the beginning. The knock on the door sent my heart racing. For a moment, instinct screamed at me to hide, to change, to become invisible again. I stood frozen, every old fear rising at once. But something stronger rose too, something steady. I opened the door as myself. The conversation was awkward, cautious, normal. When the door finally closed, I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. That night I cried harder than I had in years. Not because it was painful, but because it was real. I understood then that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about letting fear exist without letting it decide for you. I wasn't pretending anymore. I wasn't performing. I was simply being, and that was enough. Days turned into weeks. The house no longer felt like a temporary shelter for an experiment. It felt like a place where something permanent had been acknowledged. I noticed how my thoughts changed, how I planned differently, how I imagined a future that didn't involve shrinking myself to fit expectations. That future was still blurry, still intimidating, but it existed, and that alone felt revolutionary. One quiet afternoon, I realized I hadn't thought about changing back in a long time. The question that once haunted me had lost its power. It wasn't that I had decided anything officially. It was that the idea of returning felt distant, like remembering a dream you once had but no longer belonged to you. We had all cross-dressed, but the moment had become a turning point I couldn't undo. I wasn't standing between two selves anymore. I was walking forward, uncertain, visible, and more honest than I had ever been. The outside world slowly began to press in, not as a threat, but as a question. People called. Plans were made. Responsibilities waited. I couldn't stay inside the house forever, wrapped in the quiet understanding that had grown there. Each step outward felt heavier than the last, not because I doubted who I was, but because I knew how much the world liked simple stories, and mine was anything but simple. I practiced explanations in my head, then abandoned them, realizing no speech could fully translate what I had lived through. The first time I went somewhere alone, my heart pounded so loudly I thought everyone could hear it. I told myself to breathe, to move, to exist without apology. Nothing dramatic happened. No one stopped me. No one demanded answers. I completed ordinary tasks and came back changed in a way that was almost invisible but deeply profound. I had faced the world as myself and survived. That realization built a quiet strength I carried with me afterward. Not everyone responded the same way. There were questions that cut deeper than they meant to, silences that felt colder than words. I learned that acceptance didn't always look like agreement. Sometimes it looked like discomfort mixed with care, and I had to decide how much of that I could hold without losing myself. I learned to set boundaries, something I had never been good at before. Protecting who I was became a form of self-respect I was still learning to practice. One night, a conversation changed everything. Someone I loved told me they were afraid of losing the person they knew. I listened, really listened, and then I said something that surprised us both. I told them they hadn't lost me. I was still here. I was just no longer hiding. Saying that felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I had given away long ago. The silence that followed wasn't rejection. It was understanding taking time to arrive. I started noticing how my reflection no longer startled me. It met me calmly, like an old friend. I stopped measuring myself against expectations I could never meet. Instead, I focused on how it felt to move through the world honestly, even when that honesty was inconvenient or misunderstood. The transformation wasn't just visible on the outside. It had reshaped how I thought, how I spoke, how I allowed myself to take up space. As time passed, the memory of that first night grew softer, less charged, but no less important. What began as a shared moment of curiosity had become the axis my life turned on. I sometimes wondered what would have happened if I had changed back immediately, if I had laughed it off like everyone else. The thought left me strangely hollow. I knew then that I hadn't chosen this path out of impulse. I had chosen it out of recognition. Standing in the quiet of the house one evening, I felt gratitude for the people who had walked with me through uncertainty, even when they didn't fully understand. I felt gratitude for myself too, for staying, for not retreating when it would have been easier. We had all cross-dressed, but I had discovered something irreversible. I wasn't becoming someone new anymore. I was becoming someone true. By now, life had settled into a rhythm I could never have imagined. The house, once a place of experimentation and awkward laughter, had become a sanctuary where I could exist without fear. Each day, I felt more comfortable in my own skin, and each night, I reflected on how far I had come. The transformation wasn't flashy or dramatic. It didn't require applause or recognition. It was quiet, steady, and deeply rooted in every decision I made to honor myself. People outside the house began to notice subtle changes in me. I walked differently, spoke differently, and carried a kind of calm I had never known before. Some were curious, some confused, some inspired, and a few challenged me directly. Each encounter tested me in ways I hadn't anticipated, but none were threatening enough to make me doubt the choice I had made. I realized that living honestly wasn't about making everyone else comfortable. It was about being consistent with who I truly was, even when the world hesitated to understand. Occasionally, I revisited memories of that first day we all cross-dressed together. Laughter, shared excitement, fleeting embarrassment, it all seemed like a distant dream. But the memory remained important because it had unlocked something I couldn't ignore. It had shown me the possibility of courage and honesty, and once that door opened, there was no closing it. I had stepped through and discovered that pretending to be someone else for comfort was nothing compared to the relief of finally being myself. Friendships shifted. Some deepened, strengthened by honesty and trust, while others faded, unable to reconcile with the person I had become. That hurt in ways I couldn't have predicted, but it also taught me something crucial. Change often requires letting go. Clinging to old expectations would have suffocated the life I was now living. And so I learned to mourn quietly for the versions of people and relationships that could not stretch far enough to meet me halfway. The most powerful moments came in silence. Walking alone through the house at night, catching my reflection in a mirror, realizing that nothing had to be hidden anymore. I no longer felt like I was performing or acting, and that freedom was intoxicating. There was peace in simply existing, in feeling the texture of fabric against my skin, the rhythm of my own heartbeat, the weight of authenticity pressing down like a familiar friend. I knew then that transformation isn't always visible to the world. It is often internal, spiritual, and irreversible. Now, as I look back on the summer when we all cross-dressed together, I realize something profound. For everyone else, it was a playful escape, a temporary experiment, a memory to laugh about. For me, it was the beginning of a journey I could never return from. The first honest step toward a life where I no longer hid, no longer shrank, no longer feared being myself. I never changed back, not because I was stubborn or defiant, but because I had finally recognized the person I was always meant to be. Every day since has been a lesson in courage, patience, and self-acceptance. I've learned to face fear without letting it dictate my choices, to love myself even when the world questions me, and to move forward with integrity even when the path is uncertain. We all cross-dressed, yes, but I never changed back. And in that, I found a freedom deeper than I could have imagined, a peace that no reversal could ever take away, a truth I would carry with me for the rest of my life.